to be important from a chemical point of view. Notice that there is what we call a bilayer. So there are two distinct layers here. The predominant compound in the bilayer is what we call a phospholipid. And the phospholipid is really a modified triglyceride. So for a triglyceride, we had glycerol backbone here, and it had attached to it 3 fatty acids. Like this, right? And this is how your body stores triglycerides, or stores fat, as these triglycerides, these fatty with the fatty acids on it. What a phospholipid is taking one of these, this is all hydrogen here, taking one of these triglycerides and replacing one of the fatty acids on the end with a sugar, and the sugar has on it some phosphate instead of fuel. So that's kind of what that phospholipid looks like. And so we often draw them like this. We'll put a head here like this, and that head contains that phosphate and the sugar. And then we'll put on it here these 2 fatty acid tails, which are these 2 tails right here. And the reason we draw it this way is because this molecule really, it's called what we call amphipathic, which means it has partial chemistry uniqueness, right? This part of it right here, these bonds with oxygen and phosphorus are incredibly polar. So because this part's polar up top here, it's also going to be hydrophilic, right? But these bonds down here, which are exclusively hydrocarbons, of the fatty acids, those are incredibly nonpolar. So this part down here is going to be all nonpolar. And as a consequence, it's going to be very hydrophobic. Okay. Now, if you take these and mix them together in water, they will associate in a way that the fatty acid tails here are excluded from water. One way you could do that would be just simply like this. They join in a little sphere like this with all the fatty acid tails pointing inward. Okay. That's a single layer right there, right? So that's not a bilayer. And those will form if you take phospholipids and put them in water, these will form. And probably some of the first protocells had membranes that were just similar to this. But the problem with this is that now the inside of the cell, water could never exist inside the cell, right? Because you've got all of these fatty acid tails in there. So they would be pushing water out. Water would never be in. But we know cells have water on the inside and water on the outside. So the only way that you could make these work is if you put them together in a bilayer like this, where you had a phospholipid head facing inward, phosphate-containing head facing outward. You're going to have water on the outside, water on the inside, and this is now stable, right? But this inside right part of all of this is incredibly hydrophobic on the inside of the membrane. And that's actually what happens. This bilayer gives us this hydrophobic middle. So you see what happens is this inside of the cell membrane here is very hydrophobic. And in part, it's that, exactly that regulates what substances can move through the cell membrane. If something is going to pass from the extracellular fluid here to the intracellular fluid, it must pass through this hydrophobic layer. So it has to be soluble in this hydrophobic layer. So the only thing that could pass easily through would have to be small, for one thing, to fit through here without rupturing the membrane, and it would have to be lipid soluble. So nothing charged could pass through, nothing polar could pass through. So it is a barrier in that regard, selective determinant. Now you'll notice that also in this hydrophobic middle here is another lipid right here, and that's cholesterol. Now, all cell membranes have cholesterol, but depending upon where the cell is, what cell type, they might have more or less. What cholesterol affects is the fluidity of the membrane. Under certain temperatures, they make the membrane more flexible, and under other temperatures, they make it more rigid by having cholesterol. It depends on temperature. For our bodies, because of our constant higher body temperature, adding cholesterol to a membrane makes it more fluid. It makes it more